potential. There also this the end of 5-year authority will expect is the 5-year is the right number to go for this thing, because we are yes.
Yes, as far as I know from the regulations, there is not only a period of 5 years, so it can be several blocks of 5 years. We just want to start from now with the uniform classifications to know what you need to go to improve your knowledge and your work in order to assess indicated or measurable resources, because these are the resources that can be transferred to reserves. And you must achieve that. If it is 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, I don't know, you should know.
No, that's true, but the provision only there only for next 5 years, and not beyond that.
No. This, we can't go in blocks beyond that. Okay. If, as we said today, you informed us that you're still at the resource stage, and you need more time. At this point, in the presentations yesterday, clearly everybody is in the resource phase. Among other things, if you don't do a pre-feasibility study, some way of knowing whether your mining can actually work, yeah, we're going to be stuck in the resource phase, yeah. If you've done your tests, where you say that market conditions are bad, yes, you're done with exploration, you have a mining plan, but the economic conditions are bad. I believe that the area that you have, it's not going to be given to anyone. It remains your area, yeah? And we see about how you go to the next phase when we see economic conditions are good. But we can't tell you, number one, go do a pre-feasibility study. No. That's a decision you have to make. You know the information you have on the parts of the mineable area. You decided you can actually mine, or that you intend to mine immediately. Hopefully, you would have tested your equipment.
Yes,
Yes. Okay, but we can't, number one, tell you when to go do it. We would like for you to do it. But the first common ground is we know whether you are dealing with a resource. You're the one who makes those decisions about, I've now reached the stage I have reserves. I can commence mining.
Definitely, what we have done, we have projected yesterday also. The retail area or Indian side, I will go coming to the contract. We have identified 5 blocks. Each block containing the numbers. And we have selected the one side of 9,000 or
8,000.
and we are confident it is not resource, it is reserve, because it gives the condition of cut-off ratio of abundance in the quality, slope angle, and we can convert it into the reserve. But because otherwise, if it is not, we are confident of reserve, it is not a resource, it has gone into another phase. We cannot define this as the first generation mine site. We are defining that this is my first NGM. Definitely we are in a position to go and give not the resource, it is a reserve.
Yes, you were saying that it is a reserve in that area?
Yes.
It is not, because you didn't perform the test mining at that depth.
No,
at those depths.
Test mining is different issue here, but
You didn't test the technology to those
no,
depths.
it has no linkage with the technology, because the resource converting into reserves depending on your density of this thing, the sampling, and your reliability, and the reliability of the data what we have predicted.
No, but perhaps I could clarify there. The resource, the different categories of resource are the ones that where your density of drilling, sorry, not drilling, density of sampling, of information, the quality of the information and so on, that affects which category of resource you're in. In order to convert from a resource to a reserve, that's when you consider all the modifying factors. The density of the sampling doesn't change between a measured resource and a proved reserve. That's already inherent in the measured resource or the indicated resource, and the quality as well. What you're doing is taking that estimate and then applying all of the modifying factors to come up with an estimate of what you think you will actually extract under acceptable conditions, economic, environmental, social, all those sorts of conditions as well. So I think perhaps just to clarify that, obviously I'm not involved in the discussion about what the authority can require you to do or not. Yes?
Thank you. I'm speaking not as an Indian contractor, as a general comment. It is true that the decision to go for pre-feasibility or feasibility is essentially the decision of the contractor, because he would decide at what point of time he has the data available for doing a pre-feasibility study, whether in terms of scale of data for mining, processing, transport, marketing, whatever. But I see a problem, not a problem, but issue of funding the project by respective governments, respective shareholders, in terms of how do you see the project going forward into a commercial phase. Now, for instance, I just imagine if somebody comes around and says, oh, it's not earlier than 2 decades, that's likely that the oil mining project could become a reality. I would imagine there could be constraints on funding. Now, to that end, my suggestion to the authority is, could authority appoint a working group or appoint a sort of consulting group to make a sort of pre-scoping study, preliminary economic evaluation, and project a time frame when the technical data is likely to be available for moving into, let's say, pre-feasibility study, and what's the market scenario, international market scenario and pricing conditions that is potentially likely to make the project viable. If that kind of study could come up in next, let's say, 2 to 3 years, I think that would make sort of a good guideline for people and respective governments and the shareholders in a position to make funding more easily. That's all. But this is not as an Indian contractor. Thank you.
I'd like to suggest, let's get this classification scheme going. Let's see where your resources fall. It would already begin to give a good indication of where we're going. However, I also suggest that, I mean, if you can't show anybody equipment that actually does this, I mean, I've been involved in this from 1975. I was told in the late 70s that mining was right around the corner. We had a group of experts who were a part of it. You also gave us a date when this would start. And look at where we are presently. And nobody's tested anything. It's a little bit difficult. I mean, I get a working group under these circumstances to tell me what? No. Let's get this process going. Let's get a better idea of where we are in relation to this resource. And hopefully, if we can do something, test some collectors, so something that provides us with greater certainty in relation to actual mining. I think it makes life a lot easier. Where we are right now, I can't see, I don't have enough information to even turn to the council and say to them, I recommend. We need some information. There has to be an element of objectivity in all this. if we do have some kind of a classification thing on the basis of this inventory that we then have, I believe we can at least make some statements. Presently, I don't have it. I also listened to the presentations yesterday. I didn't hear anybody telling the authority that they have a plan to do tests of the collected device or anything. I mean, I am still in the same position as I was in 1975, when there were all kinds of prognostic things about mining. I mean, 78, 79, mining was right around the corner. It's been 40 odd years since. And where we are today, we are still yet to test any equipment. And I do not again see somebody who's providing you with money on the basis of where we are right now, unless it's to show that we can bring this thing from the floor of the deep sea. It still remains a basic curiosity. If I were a banker, I'd have difficulty if these tests were not done, so that I can go from the resource to a reserve. It's going to be very difficult. I just don't know that I can possibly say to anybody when mining is going to take place if nobody's telling me when they will undertake some type of test of the collected device. Notice I'm not even going to the processing end of it. I still have issues imagining that I have an ore reserve, I have an ore body, and I say I'm going to mine 3 million metric tons. I'm taking out 1.3% nickel, 1.whatever% copper, and point something cobalt. Throw away the rest of the stuff. Yeah? And I have problems believing that that's possible to do. The amount of waste that is going to be generated, I keep asking myself, where is it going to go? But I think if we can begin already the process of this classification system, this inventory of what's actually there, I think it will educate, and it will also make matters clearer. We need this inventory, and I think somebody has to do a test of the collected device, or each of you have to do a test of your collected devices, and I think we get a much better idea. But I have a lot of difficulty imagining that. I don't feel like I would even sound legitimate sitting in the authority, talking to the council, and saying, let's get a working group to tell us when mining is going to occur. Under these circumstances, I think it will be very difficult. Okay?
I always reacted to Christine's suggestion for that pre-feasibility issue. That's why I reacted.
Okay. Could I suggest that in the interest of addressing what we were asked to do, I think we've actually covered what we were asked to do. There is one aspect though that I think, because we've got a little bit of time, we put it to one side because I thought it would take too long. And that's the competent person aspect. I actually don't see this as much of an issue. I can understand why, when you're coming, you've never seen a system like this before, and you see this professional, it's called a competent person, which almost implies that if you're not a competent person, you're an incompetent person, which is not the intent at all. That it can be a little bit challenging. So I'd just like to clarify and then perhaps suggest a solution for this and see whether people are comfortable. Firstly, I guess I'm repeating a little bit what I said yesterday. That is that all of the qualifications, all the requirements for a competent person that are in the template collectively are there in order to protect the public when the company reports its resources and its reserves to the stock exchange. The investing public has got confidence knowing that a person or a group of people has taken responsibility for it, that they're qualified to do that work, that they can be brought to account or disciplined if it can be shown that they've acted outside of their professional expertise or competence. So that's the reason for it. However, there are 2 or 3 criteria that define a competent person. I'm looking at page 7 of the template now. So it's clause 11. The first one is the one I was referring to about the requirement to belong to a recognised professional organisation. The next one that's emboldened is a competent person must have a minimum of 5 years relevant experience in the style of mineralisation or type of deposit under consideration and in the activity which that person has undertaken. Now, Matthew went through in a lot of detail yesterday all these issues about competent persons, so I won't repeat everything he said. And then it goes on with guidance to say, you know, if you're a competent person, prepare and report on exploration results, then you have to have experience in the reporting of exploration results, basically just common sense. The same with mineral resources, you have to have experience in mineral resources and so on. The competent person is all about the reporting of either exploration results, mineral resources, or mineral reserves. It's not about actually things like the environment or who takes for the economic assessment that supports the reserve. These are all expert people who the competent person will ensure are involved and that he or she can rely on when he or she takes responsibility for the resulting estimate. And that estimate includes, for reserves, includes all those things like the marketing, the environmental, the social. So there will be people involved for all of those areas that they're expert in. They will help the competent person to arrive at the criteria that support the disclosure of the resources and reserves. If I could suggest, I won't read through all of this guidance here. Obviously, some of the words will need a bit of modification to cover seabed nodules as well. But the only component of the competent person definition that I think is of concern at this stage for reporting only to the ISA is that first clause, requiring somebody to be a member of a professional organisation that can discipline the person if necessary. If that was, I won't say eliminated, but in terms of, for the purpose of reporting to the ISA at the moment, you'd say that is not a requirement that we are going to impose for reporting to the ISA at the moment. But all the other requirements are, with some tweaking of wording in order to cover seabed nodules. In other words, you have to be sufficiently experienced in what you're doing to report this. To me, that just gets around this whole issue of the competent person. Then, and when it comes to public reporting, as John would very well know, it doesn't matter in some ways what it says in this guideline, because you are bound by the stock exchange rules in the country you are reporting to, and it will refer to one of these standards, and that standard has the requirement in it that the competent person must belong to a professional organisation. But perhaps throw that and then invite questions. Yes, David?
Just read this here. It doesn't actually say that you have to be a member of a professional organization. It says you need to be an industry professional with an enforceable disciplinary process. So in theory, the ISA could say, we're recognizing people as industry professionals, and if we don't like what we've done in the past, we could revoke that. So you could actually, I think, keep that and define in the definition itself.
Yeah.
It's a bit clever, but it is.
And I must actually check the wording, because when I read that just now, I thought it almost looks like there's some words missing. But I'll double check that. But yeah. Yes, Kate.
First, I like the idea of just leaving that part out and just going with the person with the skills and the lengthy experience. I don't think the ISA wants to get into judging the qualifications of the reviewer when it's maybe an internal state operation. I think the way it would actually work is if the state were applying and not applying through a competent person rule, it would have to be approved by their own internal budget processes. That they aren't going to, no state is going to spend $1 billion for a mine without running it through their own internal professional judgment of their geological survey and budget ministry. But I'd rather see it avoid too many specifics. Because it's just to provide information to the authority, it's not really decision-making material. It's information and guidance and demonstration of work that's been done. So I'd rather minimize the information than, or the requirements than add to them.
Right, okay.
I'd like
Okay.
your suggestions.
Okay. Thanks, Kate. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Let's take the case of our Indian scenario. We will have difficulty in government of India accepting the reporting by an individual, howsoever competent he would be. The mechanism will be entirely different. The mechanism will be through an independent consulting organization who will consist of professionals in all geology, mining, environmental, oceanography, and so on. And therefore, the reporting by a person, competent or not, will not be acceptable to us. So that's my problem. I mean, we need to define somewhere that it need not be, reporting need not be signed by an individual. It can be signed by an individual wherever reporting is to be for public consumption, but when the intended objective is not that, it could be left to the internal mechanism of the individual contractor.
I think that's a good point. If you could go to page 8, and if we look at the second last guideline that's in italics, I think this covers that situation, but please let me know if you think it doesn't. It really does say that although we talk about the competent person as a singular all the time, are you okay? It's where it says estimation of mineral resources may be a team effort. The second, sorry, it's the third paragraph on that page. It begins, estimation of mineral resources may be a team effort. Okay. So even though we talk about competent person in the singular, really for the purposes of defining what makes a competent person, this clause or this guideline makes it clear that it commonly, when you're reporting a mineral resource, there's more than one person involved. It's a team effort. Or it may be a team effort, put it that way. But estimation of mineral reserves is almost always a team effort, because almost certainly you won't have one person who's expert in all the fields. And it's becoming increasingly rare at the mineral resource stage that you have one person who's skilled in all those levels. So do you think that covers it? Or?
Yeah, it's fine, but maybe this needs slight tweaking. And,
right.
Yeah, I mean, this formulation like needs slightly tweaking, and this should be.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'll take that on board. Yes, Peter.
Just to remember that this is not the ISAP template.
Sure.
Yeah. But it's tweaking to the point where it doesn't actually affect, all of the other commodities it applies to. It just makes it able to be applied. That's fine. That's no problem. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I think that we've actually covered everything that we were trying to cover. I don't know whether we want to throw it over to General. It could be a bit dangerous to do that. Or just say, let's Mr. Secretary General, what would you like?
I think we've done our work. What I'd like is this afternoon, after lunch, I have no idea where the other working group is, but I would like it if we could report, each group would report to the plenary as a whole,
thereafter, Georgie, you can have your working.
Yeah,
Because
but wait.
yeah, so I'd like to suggest that we have our, we take a break, have our lunch, we come back after lunch, and we're done. So it's not obvious to me what we're going to do, look at each other. Anyway, and then we come back, and then we report to each other, see where we're at. Then there's the work of the final working group. Yeah? I have no idea how long that's going to take. But we could finish all of our work today if we get the same movement as we've done in this working group. So my suggestion is after lunch, let's meet. The two working groups that hopefully have finished their work can report on wherever they got to in terms of finishing their work. And then the third working group can get together and try to complete the work, even if it means that can be the entire plenary meeting. Let's all do that and finish with the work of the third working group. Georgie, you are the chair, so please.
Okay, but I will ask this for contractors just to
Good.
find the representative. So Japan, Korea, India, IOM, Como, GSR, China, and France. So when they will finish their meeting, we will go there and start to
Excellent.
work.
Okay, that's fine. with
So
me.
please go there as soon as they will finish. Okay, thank you.
Okay, fine. And I know Caitlin's been working a little bit on some of the things, and I've been making notes, so I'll sit down with Caitlin and we'll put together the summary document. And, yeah. Okay, great.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
First time that a lot of other so been pulled together. Literally a key last time. You can go back and get somebody to actually start a little document. We'll go to council in July next year as part of the aftermath of the 20th anniversary.
I think we are going to keep moving. The other group still be behind. and it will take maybe a few more time to get ready. But there are two already set of conclusion of the working group 1 and 2. So I will start by group number 2. If you can come and tell us what is being concluded and what are the wording for it. And then we'll go for the other one as soon as that arrives.
Okay. Firstly, I'd like to thank the group for a very efficient consideration of the issues. We got through it in good time. Also like to thank Caitlin for her expert typing and some of the wording, which she's much more familiar with how to word things for a meeting such as this. So these are our what we did and our main findings and conclusions. So we were charged to address the guidelines for the estimation of mineral resources and mineral reserves, the steps required to implement them, help the contractor standardise the classification. Now, the proven, probable and possible is mentioned there, and I'll come back to that. We're also asked to address any issues arising from different classification approaches. Okay, so we started by looking at the Crosco template as we had modified it earlier on by adding those clauses. And the first point that we spent time considering was what the term mineable area, as used in the ISA documents, how that relates to the Crosco template. And you can see that Caitlin has actually given the definition there, or the guidelines to what the meaning of that term is. We decided that what that really was saying was that it was a tonnage grade estimate within a mineable area would relate to a mineral resource as defined in the Crosco template. But when we say it relates to a mineral resource, by implication, if an appropriate technical study has been undertaken, it's also related to the proven probable reserves as well under the Crosco template. So they're grouped together. So that was really our number 3. That was our main finding there. We think that was a fairly significant conclusion. As an extension to that, we considered that the terms proven, probable and possible reserves, as they're used in the IC documents, relate most closely to the terms measured, indicated and inferred resources as they're used in the Crosco template. But again, as we say there, if an appropriate study has been undertaken, I should say, then they relate also to the terms proven probable reserves. So again, it's taken in combination there. And in the broader context of the guidelines for the estimation of resources and reserves and steps required to implement them, we believe that this was very largely discussed already today and yesterday, and it's covered by the template in its entirety with the guidance that's provided in there, with the addition of some special clauses that have already been discussed, and then also with the any modifications to the wording that needs to be undertaken in the template. And we will be getting feedback from everybody, hopefully, who would have a suggestion to make about how to tweak the wording in the template to cover that. We then looked at the 2 different, if you like, types of reporting standards that was referred to in our brief. And here we're really talking about, well, we're really talking about one, because we're talking about the UNFC in its entirety, framework classification, of which the CRISCO definitions and categories fit at the market-related end of the reporting, or the framework, I should say. So what we concluded there and put on the record was that if a contractor has an estimate of quantity and quality, or we call it materials there, primarily relates to the estimate of quantity and quality, that doesn't meet requirements to be an inferred resource under the CRISCO definition, then there are appropriate categories in the UNFC that it can be inserted into. And those, we talked about those definitions, we have categories, we haven't listed them here, but David described to us the ones that he felt were most appropriate. And it depends on what it is that's limiting that quantity and quality estimate from becoming a CRISCO resource. It depends on what those limits are, which of the UNFC categories you put them in. And as David's described before, the UNFC is a very good communication tool and way by which contractors can add additional information when they're reporting to the ISA, apart from just reporting under the CRISCO definitions. We then considered the list of modifying factors. We considered whether, firstly, there were any factors that were specific to seabed nodules that should be added, that weren't already listed in the template. And then we considered whether there needed to be any additional guidance in respect of any of the modifying factors to make them more appropriately applicable to the seabed nodules. What we concluded was that there were four aspects of the modifying factors that are particularly important in seabed nodules in reserve estimation. That's the impact of weather, the transportation, seabed topography, and international benefit sharing. So I believe we concluded that we didn't need any of those to actually be a specified additional modifying factor, but that guidance on those should be added into the template somewhere to emphasize that these are particularly applicable to seabed nodules. And then at the end, we tackled the issue of the competent person as it's described in the template. And our conclusion here was that if you look at the definition of a competent person, it includes, I guess, two broad components. One is the requirement to be appropriately experienced, so that if you're preparing an estimate of a mineral resource or mineral reserve, or you're supervising the preparation of an estimate, that you have the appropriate experience to lend authority to that estimate and to give confidence that it's been undertaken by a person or a team who has the experience they need to estimate in accordance with industry standards. The other aspect of the competent person is the requirement to belong to a professional organisation that has the ability to discipline the competent person if it's necessary. That aspect of the qualification is there only in respect of reporting to the public. It's there to boost the protection of the public when reporting of exploration results, mineral resources and mineral reserves. So we concluded that as long as, or in the situation where reports being submitted by contractors to the ISA are only for the ISA's internal use and not intended to be released to the public for the purpose of informing investors or potential investors, then that requirement to belong to a recognised professional organisation wasn't needed. So you still need the appropriate experience, but that's a requirement specific to the professional organisation was not required. We also clarified, it's not there, but we did clarify that the estimation of mineral resources and mineral reserves is often a team approach. So it's not just one person who signs off. It can be, particularly in a mineral resource situation, it can be just one person. It's more often 2 or 3 competent persons who will sign the report. And with mineral reserves, it's almost always a team approach with several competent persons signing off on the report. That really, I think, summarises our main conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comment, question?
I've voiced this before, and I'll just make it public again, that I completely disagree with the term that it's an internal, non-public report. Public reports include, but are not limited to, company annual reports, quarterly reports, and any other reports to regulatory authorities or as required by law. These reports go to the ISA and more than likely probably end up in the hands of non-government organisations and other stakeholders. So it's my feeling that they are public reports. So that's just my comment.
Thank you, Matthew. Any other comment?
Perhaps I can just add in there. Matthew and I disagree a little bit on this, so that's fine. Competent persons do disagree. But the first sentence of the definition of the public report is that it's a report prepared for the purpose of informing investors or potential investors and their advisors. So I think that in considering whether or not this should apply, I think the ISA does need to think about this, but depends on just exactly where you see these reports ending up. So I think Matthew's raised a legitimate point. There's a difference of interpretation between us, but I think perhaps the ISA will take that on board and give it some thought. Sorry.
Any other comments? Civilian.
Paragraph 4. Refer to this principal categories of measured, indicated, and inferred mineral resources. Oh, sorry.
And inferred mineral resources. Then we say, and if the necessary studies have been applied. I just wanted to know whether we could specify this.
Yeah, Caitlin and I had quite a debate on how to word this. Caitlin's concern, quite rightly, was that if we only said they relate to measured, indicated and inferred resources with making no mention of reserves, it was almost as though it excludes completely the possibility that they might relate to reserves. So it was really just an effort to say that they most closely align with the resource categories of CRISCO. But if a contractor, for example, had undertaken a pre-feasibility study and produced a reserve estimate, then that's fine. It relates also to the reserve estimate. That was the intention, but I don't know that we've got the wording right.
Well, even if in brackets we added what you just said, it helps us, and I also believe it helps the contract.
Okay, I think that's a good point. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you very much, and very good work for that team. And that's the floor to you. To our friend from Korea, who represent our working.
I can read it.
On behalf of Ted Brockett, Chairman.
Number 2. he conducted discussion and texting so enthusiastically so that he lost his voice. I am the substitutional person for the explanation of the working group number 1 results. First of all, I didn't read before. I'm
totally same with you together. I have to read some to some extent. Before I read the reports, I remember 7 or 8 participants. No, about 10, yes. 10 participants representing the contractors were set together, and we discussed very strongly about the meaning of the pilot mining test and the collector. And the contractors agreed that we are in the critical phase, that at the end of the 15 years exploration contract, every contractors, the first group of the contractors are in the phase of, in the time point of decision, extension of the contract for exploration. And concerned with collecting technology or mining technology, we all agreed that this topic is one step forward than these workshops purpose. It is a minerals resources classification, and this collector technology and mining technology is for the exploitations regulation. It is preposition. How to say? It is the precondition to figure out the exploitation regulations after exploration. It was my first summary, and I would like to read it. Working group number 1 welcomed the presentations from the contractors of the state-of-the-art of their collector development programs, and recommended that authority accept and make public this information presented in this workshop. There was general consensus among the state-owned contractors of Working Group 1 to continue this kind of discussion of potential collaboratory efforts associated with the pilot mining test and environment impact studies associated with collectors, and therefore the group recommended that such discussions should be continued. And follow on, it was recommended that the authority continue to support collaboration amongst interested contractors with regards to pilot mining test and environmental assessment efforts as a mean of helping contractors and reduce risk and cost, and share and develop technology and to reduce technology-related environmental impact. The background of this conclusion was that the ISA should take a role to initiate the collaboration between contractors. If some contractors are voluntarily cooperate and perform or conduct large-scale mining tests, the other group are not ready to accept their results. In this sense, the ISA authority should take the role of an initiative to collaborate in large-scale mining tests. associated with environmental impact test study. Also, and such support from authority might include such things as future workshops and working group 1 meetings, sometime in somewhere. Coordination of I'm sorry, I cannot read. Collaborative mining, pilot mining and environmental impact assessment system. Number 4, it was recommended that the authority provide to contractors in a timely manner, copies of the rules and regulations for the transition from exploration to exploitation for exploitation. Exploration is stubborn. And the background was that to convert resources to reserves, the mining technologies should be taken into account, and the polymetallic nodules are solid minerals. However, mining technology is very, very similar with offshore oil and industry technologies. Therefore, there are already many kinds of standards, rules, and classification in societies. Therefore, the authority should provide the information to the contractors in timely manner. It is correct? Okay. Number 5. Closer. Working group number 1 recommended that authority support the recommendation of the council and facilitate the review and release of the CCC environmental management plan taking into account and relevant proposal from the Netherlands. Frankly, I don't understand exactly the relevant proposal from the Netherlands. I have not read before. Therefore, I think you know better than me. I have just read. And number 6, contractors within working group 1 were provided with a contractor pilot mining collector survey document. Yes, two pages document. It was questionnaire. The technological items were listed up in this 2-page document. Each contractor was requested to fill out the survey on a voluntary basis and to provide the complete survey to the authority prior to the end of November 20th this year. TED prepared questionnaire lists about specification of the developed collector, and some obstacles to the pilot scale mining test, and what is being requested, what kind of support from ISA is expected, and so on. The provided questionnaires will be filled out today or next day. It is voluntarily, it is not mandatory, and the informations will be answered with yes and no, whether it is priority or not. And ISA will use this kind of information as a background, back data about preparation of pilot mining test of the contract. Finally, 7 contractors within working group 1 were in general
agreement that it was very early to identify where standardization, how to read it, standardization is required in respect to collector systems, and recommend that work should be continued of this issue. Yeah, all contractors are slightly different in different situation. Some contractors are forward, the other are in the design phase, and the other are in the laboratory test phase. Therefore, the standardization of the collector system is too early at this point. If have any comments, then Ted will answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any comments, any questions? Just the reason, just I want to add something. The number 6, the questionnaire that was issued here. We realized that some of the constructors don't have the technical person to answer those questions, and those questions are crucial for our secretary to have a very good idea of the nature of the collector, but also how far are they to be finished. But all the constructors agree that they will fill in this questionnaire and submit it to the internal to the secretary before November. So we can have a working paper for the meeting of FTC in February.
Excuse me, in para 7, I don't understand when it says standardization is required in respect of the collector systems. What are we standardizing?
That was the basic problem. It was straight out of the description of the working group. It says estimates of mineable areas presented with a view to identifying where standardization is required in the relevant areas of the CZZ. And we just weren't prepared. It just seemed to us to be too early. I mean, no one has done pilot mining tests yet, so there's so much unknown that we didn't think we could do it justice, and therefore we're saying hey, it's too early, but it's something we'd like to continue to pursue as time permits.
Any other comment? Yes.
Sorry. I have one. I will say though, the one group that was not in our meeting or not represented in our meeting this morning was our host group, and therefore somewhere I have a copy of a questionnaire for them, and I'd like to be sure that the relevant group get that. And again, it's on a voluntary basis, but we would like that information provided if you're willing to provide it. And there was a couple of items that we added that I hadn't originally typed into that. One of them, for example, if I can find my copy of it, was what can the ISA do to support you? Right? Are there things that you would like to see the ISA provide? Another one that I remember is, again, if you're willing to provide it, I think accompanying this survey, it would be very beneficial to have an illustration of how your collector works. Right? It doesn't have to be in great detail, but if you think in terms of maybe what I presented on Monday, that is kind of an illustration of how it works, I think that would be beneficial. And there was one more on my list. Well, the last one was whether or not you intend to do an epic impact experiment.
and I know that India already has. But that was the final question.
I'll just quickly comment. Thank you very much for the information. We'll try to provide the information which is applicable to our mining system, and we'll definitely give some information which we have been actually providing in our annual reports to International Seabed Authority. Apart from that, if there are any particular information which is required, we'll study and provide. Thank you.
I'll make one more comment, and Sapon mentioned it. One of the initial questions is whether or not you consider this information proprietary to your organization. If you do, just indicate that, and the ISA will treat it appropriately. If you are not uncomfortable with some of this information being shared amongst the contractors, then ISA will allow it to be shared.
We'll indicate this kind of information against each of the items. Thank you.
Any other comment with respect to the group number 1? Could I ask how we are in group number 3? Not yet? Yeah, okay. Yes, so we have a few more minutes. This afternoon we have the Secretary General dinner at Beach Restaurant in Mantaka this afternoon. Don't forget, everybody has the time. Just a second, 2 places.
I've been asked to provide a list of everybody who's in working group 2, rather than me try and guess the names and the spelling and probably miss some people out. I'll just pass this round. If you were in working group 2, could you please fill your name in on this list? Thank you.
We will have the conclusions of working group number 3.
Yeah, we had a very short but very productive meeting with all contractors. Totally there were 12 qualified persons, and we had a discussion, and we also asked everybody for his opinion, so everybody was heard. And as a result, we prepared very short summary, and maybe we could consider it as a draft, but generally all statements which were discussed are here. And the first and most important is the first one, that most contractors already follow the existing classification system, either UN or CRISCO. And yesterday, during their presentations, we saw everybody here that all contractors they're trying to find their way. So they a little bit different each other, but anyway, the general principles, the common principles, are very, very, very similar. So, and what we need now that we should prepare the kind of guidelines, and so LTC is willing to do it if Secretariat will ask us to do it, and then the procedure is that we will prepare these recommendations or guidelines and then send to Council to approve it. So this is a routine procedure in International Seabed Authority. So it was a very small but important remark about cutoff values, which is everybody agreed that it is not necessary to determine exactly the numbers of these cutoff values, but just general principles that we should use it, but not say what exactly it should be 4 or 5 or 8 or 10 kilograms per square meter. if we are talking about abundance or something like this. But anyway, some information about parameters and criteria should be there for sure. And the last one, that contractors agreed to use this resource classification scheme issued by ISA based on these guidelines and recommendation of LTC, and of course after discussion during all of our future meetings in LTC, in Council. And so after these discussions, contractors will use this scheme in their practice in reports, all reports, all kinds of reports, annual, 5 years, and final after it expires of the contract. Maybe we forgot some details, but generally that's it. Thank you.
Any comment?
This will be prepared by July 2015.
Yeah, sure.
Please, Secretary General.
What is the extension for?
Extension?
Yeah,
Extension of what?
contracts.
So you'd like us to add something about extension?
No, I mean, the working group, it's TOR. Working group 3 will determine the amount of work required by each contractor to complete the resource classification exercise for their respective areas and how long it will take. There's no reference to that there.
But no extension, no word extension.
It will determine the amount of work required by each contractor to complete the resource classification exercise for their respective areas and how long it will take.
Oh, you see that we had 8 contractors, and each contractor has his own timetable. And we had all 6 contractors who are already close to finish, and 2 other contractors who are not going to extend the contract.
Sorry, it should be reflected here what we just said. Should we put one?
No, I'm a bit at a loss. We wanted to have a resource classification that was applicable to everybody.
Yeah.
We also recognize in the group that there are contractors who just got involved in the work. We also had groups whose contracts were about to expire starting from 16 or something, 2016. We were trying to address the issue also of extending those contracts. Yeah. I don't see anything about any work that is supposed to be completed, which wouldn't be completed upon the expiry of the current contracts. Over here, there's absolutely, I mean, if everything is going to be completed upon expiry of the contract as they currently stand, I have no basis for asking anybody for any extension.
But you see here that contractors agreed to use the resources classification scheme upon expiry of the contract. So if they will ask for extension, they should use these guidelines which we will prepare, and they should follow these recommendations. This is clear for me. But I don't know if anybody would like to add something. We can add, this is a draft which we prepared during 5 minutes. Okay. No problem.
Any comment, please, from the contractor? Input?
We can add, we can add some statement here. Please tell us. What's your
sentence or statement. Maybe you will put down.
I'll go back to the TO. You explain to me whether this covers it, because I just don't see it. Working Group 3 will determine the amount of work required by each contractor to complete the resource classification exercise for their respective areas and how long it would take. I don't see that. My assumption, therefore, has to be that upon expiration of their contracts, the work would be completed. Is that what is that the message I'm supposed to take? I mean, that's my question.
You see, that before to estimate the time which it would take, they should have a document, guidelines. This is the first.
But the thing is the first point is that, in fact, most contractors already did it. So they follow one of the schemes. They can classify the resources, right? Because
we have a situation which is a contract for 15 years. The first line says, well, you're already following whatever the classification scheme is. Your last line, something about upon expiry of the contract. Presumably you'd have done everything you're supposed to do in your contract area, yeah?
Sure.
So that's what's going to happen. Hello?
Yeah? Please say, and we will put it in the draft.
What I'm reading says you are already following this classification scheme.
No, not this. The classification already existed. But we should make, based on this, the new one, which will be guidelines.
And no additional time is required. When your contract expires, you would have finished the work.
We should ask contractors.
If I can get it out, I just make a simple suggestion. And that might be if you could just add a table, simple table, 2 columns to your document here. Just simply list the contractors and provide in the second column their best estimate of time to complete this. So it might be that one contractor says 1 year, another contractor says 5 or 6, but each contractor would put their best estimate, their current knowledge and understanding, how long it will take. And if they don't think that's possible, then maybe they put that, but at least then you'd have something that indicates from each individual contractor how long they think it will take to complete that requirement.
It's a very good proposal, but if contractors are ready to do it,
yes,
we should ask them.
Yes, it has to come from the contractors.
Okay, we may do it, it's no problem. We may ask them.
Given what we were doing in Group 2 as well, the point 2 is, I'm a bit uncertain what that means. The ISA should prepare the guidelines for resource classification as soon as possible. The CRISCO template contains extensive guidelines for how to classify resources under CRISCO. I'm just not sure what the ISA is being asked to do in terms of preparing guidelines. Is this something like best practice, or is it a more specific guidelines, such as in order to get from inferred to indicated, you have to have drilled to a certain spacing? Or so I'm just a little unsure what's intended by number 2.
Maybe we should change guidelines for recommendations.
It's just turn the CRISCO template and the definitions under a ISA document.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Caitlin?
I think I was going to comment on what you said, that basically this is taking likely taking the modified Crisco, the modification we recommended to working group 2 of the Crisco guidelines. And then the ISA can modify those or adopt those and use those so that they're working, so they're enough consistent with the Crisco guidelines that many of the contractors already have to follow, so they don't have conflicting, they don't have to go through this for 2 exercises. And so we're taking the first paragraph, these are already in use. Second paragraph, taking into account any special conditions for seabed mining or the other discussions we've had here, they should be applied as soon as possible with the ISA's blessing. And then go on with the rest.
Yes.
So it's not, we're not getting a third system here.
Yeah, I think I understand it now. I've had a little bit of correspondence with Dr. Harry Parker, who's the deputy chair of Crisco, over the last couple of days, and I can certainly bounce this off him again. He did confirm one thing, that any changes that are made to the Crisco template need to be adopted, ratified by Crisco itself, but not by the CMMI, sorry, the ICMM, which is the body that Crisco is a part of. It's not a requirement under the relationship between Crisco and the ICMM for the ICMM to approve any changes to the template. Crisco itself can do that. So I don't know the timing or what might be required or expected for an ISA endorsement of this document if that's what's wanted. But I think, I need to check with my Crisco colleagues, but I think that it would be a fairly quick process once the changes are agreed to the template for Crisco to approve it, put it up on their website. It's then available. And it's a publicly available document like it is currently, but it will have the changes that we've agreed that need to be included or adopted so that it more appropriately refers to seabed mining. So I offer that as one alternative, but I don't know how that fits with how the ISA might want to either endorse or not endorse the document.
Is it possible to get it before February?
I would have to check with them, but I would say almost certainly yes. Because Crisco is...
Yes, we could use it during our...
Right. It's quite a small group of people, Crisco, and so if we give them this document with all the background notes that go with it, there'll be some discussion and debate, but I'd be very surprised if it can't be resolved within a couple of months. Would be my guess.
Well,
so if that time frame works, and it is already, then in theory you'll be able to use that information, the compilation of the annual report. So therefore, that information will be back with ISA at that point. It won't be at the point of the expiry of the contract. It will be with the annual report. Does that make sense?
And maybe you repeat it once.
Assuming that the time frame that Pat has alluded to works effectively, and we have something fairly quickly out of Crisco, then you'll be able to use it for the annual report, which goes back to ISA. So this concern about leaving it until the end of the expiry, or at the point of needing an extension, doesn't really come into play. It will just be incorporated into the next series of annual reports. The use of this classification scheme.
But not won't be the next report for the next year, because this must be a recommendation to be issued by the LCC. We have a meeting in February, so the report starts to arrive in March, at the end of March, so it won't be possible.
This is only report for 2015.
Yes.
Earliest.
Earliest.
any other comment for this? No? We have a coffee break at this time, and we are waiting for the director of NCAOR that is coming, and to join us after the coffee session. Ladies and gentlemen, we are arriving at the last portion of our meeting, which are the concluding remarks, and I would like to call to the stand to Honorable Mr. Miyaloto Alanto, Secretary General of International Civil Society.
Classification experts, competent persons, representatives of contractors, members of the Legal and Technical Commission, and representatives of the host government. On behalf of the authority, I wish to express profound thanks to you for making this workshop possible. In my inaugural address, I stated what the authority's objectives for this workshop were. Namely, this was to ascertain the work being undertaken by contractors for polymetallic nodule exploration in the area with a view to the standardization of the exploration and resource data required in Section 11 of the standard clauses of exploration contracts, to review current practice in land-based mineral development on national reporting standards for exploration results and resource classification, identification of special aspects of polymetallic nodule deposits that should be addressed in resource reporting standards, identification of any issues arising from differences in national reporting standards to which the authority should respond, to assist contractors to identify and implement best practices in polymetallic nodule resource evaluation, identification of the work to be completed by contractors in this regard, and to determine the time required to fulfill the identification and implementation of best practices in polymetallic nodule resource evaluation, and to provide guidance to the ISA regarding relations with Mineral Information Standards Organization, including potential cooperation with CRISCO's work under UNFC. We met for these past few days. Today we convened working groups to look at, among other things, areas of possible collaboration, to take a look at the standards by both groups and see how they could be both implemented by contractors, and also to see what the work was that was required to be fulfilled by contractors in this regard. We have heard the results of the working groups. There's no hierarchy in the three working groups. In relation to the resource classification, the idea is that it's to be applied to all contractors. All contractors will be required to do this in their 15-year exploration contract. Working Group 3's report was interesting to me because I basically have heard that the standards we are talking about for the resource classification are already being implemented by all contractors. I also heard that these contractors will be able to complete their work, be they of the first group, the pioneer investors, or the new entrants into polymetallic nodule exploration, that everybody will be able to complete their work by their contract deadlines. Under the circumstances, I have a bit of difficulty because one of the reasons I was convening this workshop was to agree on the standards to use for the resource classification and to find out whether or not there was indeed scope to be able to go forward to the council and to say to the council, we have this resource classification scheme that we're going to use, and contractors may need some more time to implement the scheme. Having been informed that the work is already being done in accordance with the classification scheme of both UNFC and CICERO already, and that the work will be completed by the time the contracts expire, and I'm talking about those that expire in the immediate future. Indeed, even the urgency I had associated with this work, for me, does not exist. The urgency I had associated with this was the fact that we could then, if there was more time required, to implement either or both schemes, this could be made known to the council in consideration of any requests that come to it for the extension of exploration contracts. If indeed the work will be completed on time by those contractors whose contracts expire shortly, I don't have a basis for asking for anything to do with any extension. The work will be done, the scheme is already being followed, and that's it, punto. The matter of the classification scheme is something that my idea is that it's applied by all contractors present and in the future, and we will do the work associated with it in time for consideration by the Legal and Technical Commission, and subsequently they make their recommendations to council. Council may or may not decide to adopt them, and one would hope, and I suspect council will indeed adopt them, and if everybody else who came before, whose contracts expire in the near future, are already applying it and have no problem providing us with the information that I had indicated before, and which was considered by Working Group 2, mineable areas, proven possible resources and reserves. I've done my work, at least from my vantage point. I really wish to thank everybody for participating in the workshop. What we will do is we will go back to Kingston. The information, the presentations, the guidelines that we've drawn up and need to adjust. I will make sure everybody gets a copy of it to be able to comment on it, and I will make this information available to the Legal and Technical Commission. However, I am not in a position, based on the information I got from the third working group in relation to any time requirements by those contractors whose contracts will expire soon. I must admit that on the basis of the presentations I heard, it's not immediately obvious to me that either UNFC or CICERO is being utilized by everybody at the present time. However, Working Group 3 reports that this is indeed the case, And working group 3 was with the representatives of contractors. I, however, have to report what the conclusions and recommendations of the workshop were, and you will find all of this as soon as we get back to Kingston. We will try to put all the material together. In that regard as well, I'll be very grateful if all participants have given the authority, the secretariat, their email addresses, because that's how I would like to send them to you. I would be eager to receive your comments on them. And since there is no urgency to provide all of this information to the Legal and Technical Commission in February, because that was to be done to ensure that their recommendations were made available to the Council at its meeting in 2015. We will proceed, however, and try and get some information to Council. But in relation to the resources classification scheme, I don't see that I'm requested by any contractor to help facilitate any extension in this regard. I wish to thank the host government very, very much. It was a very, very good location. Yes, we did have some problems with light outages. However, since I do come from a country where this is quite regular, I'm not in a position to complain. Yeah? The lights that come on. We are in a very fabulous location. The Vivanta is very nice. Each time I wake up every morning, unfortunately we spent a lot of time here. By the time we got back, it was already dark and most people were already pooped out. But I truly appreciate the opportunity to do this workshop here, and I'm also grateful for whatever results we have received. Thank you very, very much.
Continuing with the concluding remarks, now I would like to call Dr. Wadika from Mo. Yes, please.
Thank you, Santos. Respected Secretary General and delegates, it is my pleasure to be here at the closing session of the workshop. Personally, this is the first time to attend the authorities workshop, in which I had gained significantly in terms of understanding of resource classification, and specifically in the context of UNFC and GRISCO classification system, which offer the potential of providing the template for polymetallic nodules. And all are aware of the substantial progress which has been made in this direction in this workshop. This is quite significant, specifically for the purpose of reporting following the criteria of transparency, materiality, and the competence. Another important aspect pertains to the presentations by various contracting parties, which deals with the exploration aspects, and further going beyond this exploration aspect into the field of harvesting, specifically in terms of technology developments pertaining to the mining system as well as the extractive metallurgy. I mean, there have been a lot of promising results which we could see from the presentations made by various contracting groups. The entry of private sector in the field of exploration has added new impetus and optimism, which Secretary General is vigorously pursuing. One can see the workshop, which is specifically at the insistence of Secretary General, which he told us last year itself, and he himself has decided the venue for the workshop. And it is my entire appreciation on behalf of all delegates goes to Dr. Nee Adundan, who is very much here. And I take this opportunity to thank each one of us to be here, which have made this workshop possible. And my sincere appreciation goes to Dr. Pratima Johri, who has single-handedly worked on this organization of the workshop very efficiently. And I hand over this mic to Dr. Rajan, Director NCR, who has been contributing immensely along with his team led by Dr. George Korea. I think I would give this opportunity to Dr. Rajan to formally make a vote of thanks. Thank you.
His Excellency, my friends from different parts of the world, I think have the last word. Okay. Before I came in here, one of my colleagues told me to make it short and sweet. I'll not go a lot, I will not talk a lot. I'll go by what you said. Making it short and sweet. Okay. Anyway, it has been a pleasure hosting all of you. You have been wonderful. You could learn a lot from you. And as His Excellency pointed out, there has been some hiccups. I'm sorry about those because that's way beyond anyone's control. And manfully and woefully, we are very good about it. And that's something which has not been happening before. I don't know why it happens so often here, but usually it doesn't happen. So I take my word for that. You know? Anyway, it has been a learning curve for me also, as Dr. Vaktika rightly pointed out. I could get to meet all of you. I could get to learn a lot from you. And the messages you take across from here is one of Bonhami friendship. And together we can achieve a lot. I think that should have been the thing which are almost our minds. And if you have achieved that, I would say this workshop has been a grand success. If we have all learned to live together, to move forward. Because unless we all learn to move forward together, I think we'll be back to where we started. We'll be going around in circles, which I'm sure nobody would like to, whether it's the people from the LTC, from the Seabed Authority or the contractors. I'm sure that nobody would like to see that we go back and forth and go around in circles without achieving anything. So I'm sure, there's always next time. I'm sure by the time the next LTC or ISA meets, I'm sure you will not be disappointed. You will have a better. Definitely, I'm sure that they are all going to come back to you saying that, look here, you have achieved the end result which you are hoping for. So before I sign off, I would like to say thanks to all of you and to the organizing people, the people who were with me all through. I thought I could just ask all of you, please stand up and give them a big hand, ladies and gentlemen. John, all of you, please. So if this workshop has been successful, the credit goes to them. If there are any problems, you blame it on me. Thank you so much. And tomorrow's program, I'm sure you would have seen it. And enjoy your stay here. No more discussions on the perimeter knowledge from no one. Please let us discuss something about Goa. Has got much more to offer than what you can ever think of. Enjoy your time here, and I wish all of you a safe journey back home. Thank you. His Excellency at 7 o'clock. Do please join. Right?